Hi everyone, welcome to the April 27th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined in just a moment by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, the one podcast that we'll be doing this week, as there will be no forecast on Friday this week. Busy week of racing coming up, obviously with the Oaks and Derby, and we will be previewing both of those races later in the show. We're going to start things off, though, with our typical recap that we do on the Pacecast, an abbreviated recap, as there wasn't a ton of graded stakes action across the country last week. We'll talk about three stakes races that took place, actually, from three different venues: the Santa Margarita from Santa Anita, the Elusive Quality from Belmont, and the Bewitched from Keeneland. The winners of all of those races were pretty impressive. We'll also mention a couple of maiden races that took place at Santa Anita and Belmont that really got the racing world energized, as a couple of 3-year-olds made their career debuts in very impressive fashion. Flightline out at Santa Anita and First Captain at Belmont. So we'll talk about all of that action. And then we'll get into the meat of the show, which is going to be a Kentucky Derby and Oaks preview. The Derby was just drawn this morning, so all the post positions are set. The field is in place. So we'll talk about the major contenders and our opinions in that race. And we'll also mention the Kentucky Oaks on Friday and talk about some of the major contenders there. But Craig, as our video team informed us at the end of last week, this is actually TimeformUS Pacecast episode number 100. Certainly doesn't feel like 100 episodes to me.
No, it doesn't. You make it easy. They kind of fly by, and I enjoy doing them, hopefully as much as people like listening to them. So yeah, I would have never guessed 100, and I think that's just the Pacecast that we've been doing. Doesn't include the forecast. So hope we get at least another 100 more.
Yeah, that'd be nice. And I always enjoy talking about these races with you as we handicap and look back. And we're going to start this show by doing a bit of a recap, looking first at the Santa Anita card from Saturday. A couple of races that took place consecutively, races 7 and 8. The 8th was that feature, the Grade 2 Santa Margarita, and it was won in visually impressive fashion by the Bob Baffert trained As Time Goes By. This is a lightly raced daughter of American Pharaoh out of that excellent race mare Take Charge Lady, who's also been an amazing producer as well, having thrown Will Take Charge as well as Take Charge Indy. Well, now she's got another graded stakes winner in As Time Goes By, who won this race by over 9 lengths and certainly looked like she's one who's going to have a major say in this division moving forward.
Yeah, this was a really impressive performance. I'll start out by saying the TimeformUS speed figure was, I believe, a 121. I'm going off the top of my head. I forgot to make notes on that one, but I think it was there in the low 120s. And I'll add, me and my assistant actually had a pretty good discussion on this one, because honestly, it could have been higher. He took the conservative route, and I'm fine with that. Looking at the figures in the charts, they look just fine to me. But if anything, I would upgrade this race. I certainly wouldn't downgrade it. And I know you've been a fan of this horse, and I'm curious what you thought of the tactics, because it was definitely a new sign of early speed that we hadn't really seen before, particularly since she's been going 2 turns. So she looked really good to me, and as good as anybody we've seen anywhere else. I know she got beat by Swiss Skydiver in her prior start, but this looked like a totally different filly to me, a much more improved version, and I think she's going to be a force in the division.
Yeah, I mean, say what you will about Mike Smith as a tactical rider with different kinds of running styles, but when he's on a horse that he feels is the best in the race, he's not afraid to take no prisoners on the front end, and that's what he did with As Time Goes By. I mean, none of the fractions are color-coded red or blue in TimeformUS PPs, but, I mean, just looking at the pace figure line, they were going a solid clip up front. The first couple of pace figures are 135, and the horse that was chasing her early, Harvest Moon, actually owned by the same group as Time Goes By, she's a solid filly in her own right, and as Time Goes By, just kind of flicked her away on the far turn. The race actually fell apart behind the winner as Longshot This Tea got up for second, but she was far behind As Time Goes By. And this filly, I mean, she handled 9 furlongs here. She looks like one that could gallop 1.25 miles, though. I know there aren't too many opportunities to do that later in the year, other than I think the Delaware Handicap at this point, because they've shortened the personal ensign at Saratoga in the summer. But she's the kind of horse that Bob Baffert could probably travel with and target some Grade 1 races, because she looks like the kind of horse that could join that conversation along with Swiss Skydiver, Latruska, and Monomoy Girl.
Yeah, no argument for me there. Like I said, the figure could have been higher, definitely not lower. So it was just one of 2 exciting performances we saw at Santa Anita. But I know everybody was excited about Flightline, but this was actually the one that impressed me the most. I just thought it was really good. The visual matched the number and was maybe even better than that. So looking forward to see where she shows up next.
Yeah, I completely agree with you because as time goes by, she's a horse that I think you can say at this point has arrived and she's going to be a major player in this division. I think it now remains to be seen what we're going to get from that impressive maiden winner Flightline in subsequent starts. I mean, this horse could go in a number of directions. He earning a 121 TimeformUS speed figure in his career debut, going 6 furlongs. It's hard to extrapolate out what this horse might be able to do going longer distances. I know his pedigree says that he should be able to go longer, but based on the high level of speed that he showed in this first start, I mean, who knows what kind of horse this could be?
Yeah, this was pretty crazy, and this is similar. It was in the same time frame where it actually could have been higher. The 121 TimeformUS speed figures actually knocked down a little bit from a 125 final time figure because the pace kind of slowed after he'd established a lead. And I actually think that's a good sign for a horse that wants to stretch out. The fact that he was able to slow it down a little bit, and I like that the pace figure at the half mile was 118, and he was able to finish up in a 125, which showed he wasn't just coasting to the wire. He was still running. So just totally blown away. I'll have to be honest, I wasn't watching a lot of racing on Friday. I volunteered at a junior tennis tournament and I saw all the buzz on this horse and was like, okay, I guess I got to go watch this one. And even so, even expecting to see a big effort, it was more than what I expected. It was pretty impressive. It's hard to say what was really behind him. The second place finisher was another first-time starter, but it was from the Bob Baffert barn. But the fact Flightline went off at 4-5 in here against that Bob Baffert says the word was out and people knew he was pretty good. I don't know if they expected this kind of performance, but the sky seems to be the limit off of this one.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've seen a debut that was quite this impressive. I mean, I know Life is Good turned some heads last year, but I would say, I mean, kind of have to go all the way back to when Justified debuted to find a horse that looked this impressive, making his career debut as a 3-year-old. And Flightline, I mean, you talked about the speed figure, and it looks totally legitimate. The final time number was actually a 125, 4 points higher than the 121 TimeformUS speed figure, adjusted down a little bit for pace. And I was mentioning this horse stretching out because even though he won going 6 furlongs and showed so much speed, he's got a pedigree that says he should be able to go longer. He's a son of Tappet, and his dam Feathered, she was a really nice race mare. She was second in the Starlet as a 2-year-old, a grade 1 event, going 1 mile and a 16th. As a 3-year-old, she was second in the grade 1 American Oaks, going 1 mile and a quarter, actually won the grade 3 Edgewood, going 1 mile and a 16th on the turf. So she was a really versatile horse, and there's actually some Phipps breeding on the dam side because Feathered is out of a Receipt, who was a Phipps bred horse by Dynaformer out of Finder's Fee, who was that graded stakes winner that Shug McGahee had back in the 90s. So a lot of stamina in this pedigree, but I'm not sure that that's going to really translate into Flightline's future because he just has so much speed. And one of the reasons that he was bet down to 4-5 in this race is, I looked back in retrospect, was he unsurprisingly was working really well ahead of this start, but he wasn't just working well, he was working like he wanted to run a lot faster than they were allowing him to in the morning. If you go back and look at his workouts in XBTV, he's just one of these horses that has uncontrollable speed. They tried to work him in company a few times, and he was throwing his head all over the place, trying to get away from his workmates. He did not want to be alongside another horse. He wanted to run free all by himself, and his stride is so massive, it's almost like he didn't have another gear other than going really fast. So I wonder what they're going to do with this horse, what kind of races they'll target, because it seems like unless they allow him to run freely on the front end, I don't know how much farther he wants to go, but boy, does this horse look like he can target grade 1 races in the future because he is really talented.
Yeah, and with his breeding, I mean, you never know. Maybe that's just his style and he can still handle the distance. What I found interesting, you do have to have some questions because he didn't debut until the end of April of his 3-year-old season. So obviously there were some issues. But looking at that same work tab, he's a horse who didn't show up on the work tab until January, but he's basically been working steady every single week since. So hopefully whatever was wrong is straightened out, and he's a horse we're going to be able to see run quite a bit this year because the talent was mind-blowing.
We also saw a couple of impressive performances at Belmont Park on Saturday. The winner of the stakes race that day, the elusive quality going 7 furlongs, was Casa Creed for Bill Mott, a horse who had been competing in a lot of high-level races, going a mile on the turf. He actually ran on the Breeders' Cup Mile last year. He wasn't competitive there, but he's been right there in a lot of other Grade 1 races, like the Shadwell at Keeneland last fall, recently the Kilroe out in California, and he was just getting a bit of class relief here, dropping back down into listed company. A pretty tough listed stakes race, but he was also turning back to 7 furlongs, and it just seemed like getting to use that speed that he has in the late stages really allowed him to be successful here.
Yeah, this was a race. I'm going to do something I rarely do and red board a little. I know you like this horse as well. But this is the one race that I got to watch on Saturday, and it was because of Casa Creed. I really thought he laid over this field on paper. And when I was watching, I didn't really get to pay attention to the fraction, so I didn't really know what was going on. And when he won, I kind of shook my head and was like, okay, yeah, I got that one right, cut it a little close. But when I sat down on Saturday night to do the figures and saw just how slow they went early, it's really pretty amazing to me he was able to get up. Now, it does help a bit that the speed horses weren't really true contenders in here and kind of just set it up for the others. But that said, he was still able to run down front, run the Fed and Value Proposition, who were contenders in this race. So I thought it was a really good effort from him. He got a 120 TimeformUS speed figure. That is one that got the pace notation from us because there was just no way to make a true speed figure off of the final time, but we tell you that and we show you that in the chart. You can see he only got a 106 final time speed figure, so it was adjusted quite a bit. I joked about this race on Twitter saying it was named the elusive quality. They should strip it just from this year because he was a horse who could have never run that slow at any point in the race, but Casa Creed was able to get the job done despite that, despite the pace, and I thought it was a really good effort, and looks like he's ready to jump right back into graded stakes to me.
Yeah, I talked about this race on my solo forecast last week. I liked this horse quite a bit. I like you. I thought the class relief was really going to work for him, and I wasn't too bothered by the turn back in distance. The kick that he showed at the end of the race, though, I've got to say, it surprised me a little bit because I thought Joe Bravo was leaving this horse with too much to do. It wasn't really his fault that everybody else rated so aggressively. I mean, he kind of put this horse where he figured to be in the early going. It just got shuffled back a little bit, moving down the backstretch. I don't know what the rider of Proven Strategies, Manny Franco, was doing. He looked like he could have been 4 lengths ahead of this field early based on how fast he had run in some prior races. But, I mean, he took away that horse's speed advantage and basically gave him no chance to win by turning it into a quarter-mile sprint to the wire. I know Proven Strategies was a long shot in this race, but you're giving your long shot no chance when you ride them that way and you have the only speed. So it really kind of set it up for horses that were right off the pace. And I mean, you could see a horse that was 59-1 here, Tell Your Daddy, just missed hitting the trifecta because he was right on top of that slow pace. And really the only horse that made that big run from the back of the pack was Casa Creed. And even at the 8th pole, it looked like he might have too much to do, but he really leveled off beautifully in the final 8th of mile and was able to get up. And off a performance like this, you wonder what direction they're going to go. Are they going to go back into the tough mile races, or will they say maybe he could go a little bit shorter than this and target a race like the Grade 1 Jaipur on Belmont Day? Personally, I might go in that direction given the finishing speed he showed here.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation for these horses because they don't get a lot of chances to run the 7 furlongs and 6 furlongs on the turf. Turf sprinting is definitely taken off in this country. We're seeing more and more of them be run. But I don't know what you do with a horse like this because he's shown to be good in both. I do think there is still a pretty clear-cut class distinction between the 2-turn and even the good 1-turn miles that they run at Belmont on some of these and when they turn back to this distance. So I always think these horses have a bit of an advantage, but maybe he'll be like the mare whose name I'm forgetting who turned back and won a bunch of sprints at the end of last year when she wasn't quite good enough to win the top mile races. He could certainly make a nice living there, I would think.
Yeah, Got Stormy.
Yes.
I could see him having a similar kind of campaign to that because she didn't look like a turf sprinter prior to turning back in those races, but she just found some easier competition. So I think you make a really good point about that. The other race that we're going to discuss from Belmont's Saturday card was another very impressive debut winner in race 1 on that card. That was the Curlin Colt First Captain, who was making his debut for Shug McGahee. And this was impressive in a different way than Flightline was, but impressive nonetheless, as this horse looked like he hadn't really gotten it all figured out when they got into the stretch of this race. He was idling a little bit. It looked like Mahamel, who was a well-bet Pletcher first-time starter, was well on his way to a clear victory. But when Jose Ortiz got into first captain at the 8th pole, this horse just kicked into another gear and ran by the leader Mahamel to get the victory by 3/4 of a length.
Yeah, this was scary visually, knowing the breeding, and he was coming from the Shug McGahee barn, who doesn't win a lot first out, but he has won with some really good horses. So anytime he does that, wins first time out with one, it does tend to raise some eyebrows. So I would expect this horse is going to progress off of this. He only got a 106 TimeformUS speed figure. Part of that, it was knocked down because of, once again, another just really, really slow pace. The final time figure was actually a 112, and these aren't pace adjusted. I did use the same variant for all of them, but I would suspect with a little more ground for this horse and a better pace, he's got much more in the tank than that 106. So really impressive debut from him.
Yeah, and if I'm going to talk about a horse that I think is going to be a player in the major 3-year-old races later in the year, like the Travers, I would be looking more to this horse than Flightline, who I still, as impressive as he was, I wonder about how far he's going to want to go, especially when you get out to those classic distances. But First Captain seems like the kind of horse that, 7 furlongs, he's just getting started. He's going to want to go 2 turns and really run all day. It's too soon to make a race like the Belmont Stakes, clearly, especially for Shug McGahee, who does not rush his horses along. But I would imagine that Shug has the Travers penciled in on this horse's schedule and probably has a path in his mind to get there, maybe an allowance race than the Jim Dandy. So we'll see what he decides to do. But being by Curlin out of that mare America, who was campaigned for Bobby Flay, she was grade 1 placed, going 1 1/8, I think 1 1/4 even. So this one's definitely bred to go farther. And I was looking up the Trackus numbers of this race just because I was curious. And First Captain actually came home his final 8th in 11.95 seconds. And I know the pace of this race was slow, but it's rare to see a horse making up ground going a sub 12 final 8th on the dirt. So I just think this horse has a big future going longer, and it'll be interesting to see what Shug decides to do with him in the near future.
Yeah, and to that last 8th that you're pointing out, he was a good 3.5 lengths back according to the chart of a very well bet first time starter who wasn't stopping at all. So I look forward to this one, and I'm in your camp as well. I would be just as excited or more about him as I am with than Flightline.
Before we get into our Oaks and Derby preview, just one more race to talk about from last week. That was actually a race from Friday's closing day card at Keeneland. The feature that day, the Grade 3 Bewitch, going 1.5 miles on the turf. And Craig, I know a horse that you had been a fan of, Warlike Goddess for Bill Mott. Boy, does it seem like this filly is putting everything together, because this was as impressive a performance I've seen from a filly or mare on the turf really all year.
Yeah, this was a big effort from her. She had won over the Gulfstream surface at 1 3/8, which with her style is saying something. She beat that good Todd Pletcher filly who had been running so well. But she just took it to another level here. She basically toyed with this group, won by almost 4 lengths. And I'm not one to often argue she could have run faster, but I'll say she could have won by more, I think, had Julian Leparoux really asked her. I don't know how much it would have changed the speed figure at this distance, very little, but it was as impressive as it gets. So really good future for this one, particularly at these longer distances. And I would say she probably has more in the tank than the 123 that we saw here.
Yeah, what's the cliche? They jumped in at the quarter pole. Well, it actually looked like that with this horse. She came to the top of the stretch looking like Leparoux had a ton of horse underneath it. And when he asked her just very lightly, she sprinted through the lane and the others were just basically spinning their wheels. I think she ran a 22, just over 22 second final quarter mile in here. Just really impressive going 1.5 miles, especially on a turf course like Keeneland's, but this one was rated good. So a really nice horse, one that I know Bill Mott has been targeting in these marathon races really right from the start of her career. So you would imagine she can only get better from here. So definitely a horse to look forward to later in the year. Well, Craig, that's all the race we want to talk about from last week. Now it's time to look forward because there's a lot going on this weekend, and the focus obviously is on Churchill Downs, where they're running those two big races for the 3-year-olds, the Oaks on Friday and the Derby on Saturday. Before we get to the Derby, let's start off with a bit of a discussion of the Oaks, the feature on Friday's card at Churchill Downs, race 11, obviously going a mile and an eighth for the 3-year-old fillies. And we've got the three main players, the three favorites on the morning line, those being Molithot, Search Results, and Travel Column. They're going to take a lot of money in here, but this is a group that we've been talking about all spring. They're very evenly matched from a speed figure standpoint, and I think there's still a lot of sorting out to be done with these 3-year-old fillies.
There is. I'm pretty up in the air at this race as we're recording. I don't even know if it's one I'll bet and might just watch as a fan because I'm confused. I don't know what direction I would want to go in here. I kept expecting some horses to take a big jump as we move forward on the Oaks Trail. And it didn't really happen outside of maybe Search Results. I mean, she got a 110 TimeformUS speed figure. She kept progressing race by race. I mean, she's only run 3 times, but she's at least improved every time out. The others, they just kind of keep running the same upper 108, 107 type speed figures. They're running more distance here, and there's only a few who I think I could look at and say that one wants more distance. The others, I'm not sure. So I don't know where I want to go. If I had to say the horse I think is most likely to win, I think it's Molithot, who was actually tagged as the 5-2 morning line favorite. She doesn't have quite she doesn't have a speed figure edge over anybody in here. She ran a 106, winning the Ashland at Keeneland. But I just really like the way she did it. She did it in that short stretch at only a mile and a 16th. And she's the one horse that really jumps out to me as the one who that extra half furlong is going to help. I do think she's going to get plenty of pace in here as I look. The pace projector predicts a fast pace. As I look through, I see plenty of speed in here that I think is going to go out and set it up. So no real value, but I think personally she's the horse to beat.
Yeah, I think she's definitely one of the major players in here. And while I was saying at the start that I think these horses are evenly matched from a speed figure standpoint, I mean, there's no question that the three favorites are the three that are the most accomplished coming into this race. They've won the preps, and they've generally been impressive doing it. So, I mean, they're the ones to beat. I think you can make some cases for some horses that are fringe players to maybe use underneath, but I'm really not against any of the three major players in here. I will say, though, the one that I'm a little bit iffy about out of those three would be Molithot. And frankly, I thought I was going to like her more than I ended up liking her when I went to handicap this race. And I did have to end up making top 4 picks in here because I'll be recording a video preview of the Kentucky Oaks tomorrow. That'll be out on DRF.com and the YouTube channel. I'll be doing TimeformUS video previews of both the Oaks and the Derby. But I ended up actually picking Molithot 4th in this race because she's one of these Pletcher horses that I think you would have expected to run a faster figure by now. And Todd Pletcher is a trainer that generally gets his horses to perform when they're young. And she's already tried a mile and an eighth. It's not like she's going to get a whole lot better running a mile and an eighth again in this Kentucky Oaks. And sure, she hasn't had ideal trips in some of her recent races, but that's often been her own doing. I mean, remember going back to that Demoiselle, I mean, she got what would be considered a good trip for most horses, stalking on the inside. Maybe the inside wasn't the place to be in that race, but she was just really trying to disengage from her rider in that spot. John Velasquez, you might remember, took out the whip before they got to the 3/8 pole, was just trying to get her into the race. And she's just not the kind of horse that takes you there. I mean, she's won all of her races, obviously, and she's just gotten up to beat horses like Millefoy and past the Champagne. And clearly she's been more visually impressive than the winning margins would indicate. But in a large 14-horse field, I worry a little bit about a horse that doesn't travel in the bridle, that needs a lot of riding to produce her top effort, and especially if she doesn't break alertly and maybe gets caught in a little kickback, she's the one that I worry the most about from a trip standpoint, maybe not showing up with her A effort. So I ended up taking a bit of a stand against Molithot, and I do think she's going to end up being the favorite in this race. So I ended up giving preference to Travel Column and Search Results, and I'm interested, Craig, what you think of the latter runner, Search Results, who is undefeated in 3 career starts. She's really the least tested of those 3 major players coming into this race just because she hasn't met the best competition yet, but she certainly looked good in all 3 of her victories so far.
Yeah, the one thing I did like about her was how she was able to put away Miss Brazil. I shouldn't say put her away, but she battled with her in a race that should have favored her when she was able to set a slow pace, and she was still able to wear her down. Then she stretched out. I'm a little bit leery because these races occurred at Aqueduct and they were both on slow surfaces, ones that we have labeled a 5 on our 1 to 10 scale. So I do have some reservations there, but there's no denying she ran the best speed figure. I mean, you could just look at it compared to the Wood Memorial, which got a very low speed figure for that race, but they were noticeably faster. There was a race, an older, I can't remember if it was Phillies or Colts, that they stakes race on the card that they were pretty much even with, even though there was some pace in that one that caused it. I think it was an older race for older males. But I mean, I have no real knocks on her. I'm not a huge fan of the 12 post. I think that could cause a few problems, given that she likes to be close up front and there is some other speed. So she may have to work out a trip that she hasn't done before, but I have no real knocks on her. I don't have any knocks on any of the top 3. I mean, they've all ran well pretty much every time out. The only other horse I really wanted to mention in here, and it was one I didn't think I would like, but she's actually quite a price, and she comes out of winning the Fantasy Stakes, is Pauline's Pearl. She was a horse who in the Honeybee just got trapped behind a glacial pace and did no running. But I thought she really took a step forward in that Fantasy where the pace was much faster. She was able to stay close to it and just outfinish the others in here. So at 20 to 1, she is the one long shot that I would like in here and use on some of my tickets.
Yeah, it's funny you bring her up because I ended up just leaving her out of my top 4, but she is the one horse that's double-digit odds that I thought was pretty interesting. I don't know if she's going to be 20 to 1. I think the morning line maker made a bigger disparity between the favorites and the long shots maybe than I would have in this race. But she is a horse that I think might be heading in the right direction at the right time. So she's a little interesting here as a daughter of Curlin. A little more distance shouldn't bother her. And Steve Asmussen's other runner, Clairiere, I mean, she's not out of the conversation either by any means. She's kind of just outside those top 3 favorites looking in. But she's run well in all 4 of her career starts. Maybe the one concern with her is that she doesn't have as much tactical speed as the other 3 or 4, so she could have a little bit more ground to make up, but she's certainly finishing at the end of her races, and she runs like a mile and an eighth, is going to be right up her alley. Though I ended up going with Travel Column as my top pick, and Travel Column obviously is the horse that beat Clairiere last time pretty decisively in that Fairgrounds Oaks. And, Craig, I saw that fast pace characterization on the TimeformUS Pace Projector, and I'm not surprised at all because it's a 14-horse field, and the way the Pace Projector is set up, 14-horse fields generally do produce fast paces and fast pace characterizations in the algorithm. But I have to say, I don't see that much speed in this field, not that much front-running speed at the least, because, I mean, I guess Ava's Grace is going to go to the lead, but when you look through this field and their early pace ratings, really, only I think a couple of them have early pace ratings that even break 100. One of them obviously is Ava's Grace, the other search results, but the other horses are all not that fast. I mean, they've run close to some slower paces in their prior starts, but I don't think they're going to be going that quickly up front, which is one of the reasons that I'm a little bit concerned about a tightly bunched pack for a horse like Malathaat, who does not run well in traffic, or at least hasn't in her prior starts. So I worry about some horses that have to come from really far back in this race because I'm not sure I see them going that quickly up front. So that's another reason why I'm giving a horse like Travel Column preference over Clairiere, who obviously she beat last time, but I also think Travel Column's going to work out a better trip. And the more that I look through Travel Column's past races, she just seems like a horse that's really put it all together. I mean, once upon a time, she was breaking slowly, was kind of green. Remember in the Goldenrod, she didn't get the right trip. She kind of took herself out of the race early when she hopped up at the start, got sandwiched between horses. But since then, she's gotten over those gait problems. She broke much more alertly last time out in the Fairgrounds Oaks and was able to put herself in a good position stalking the pace. She's got a pedigree that says she should run all day, so I'm not concerned about the stretch out in distance. And I found a stat for Brad Cox that I guess maybe I shouldn't be surprised about, though I'm always kind of surprised when stats are this good. Horses that won their last starts in dirt route grade 1 races, Brad Cox is 14 for 29, winning at 48% with a 364 ROI. Obviously, that stat with last at winners in Grade 1 dirt routes applies both to Travel Column and Essential Quality in the Kentucky Derby, so make of that what you will. But that's not all Monomoy Girl. I mean, he's won with, I think, 6 or 7 different horses in that sample. So I think it just speaks to the fact that Brad Cox generally has these horses ready to run their A race on the big days. So I'm going to go to Travel Column, and I think 3-1 is probably a fair price on her.
All right. Well, somewhere in this discussion, I haven't been able to figure out who you squeezed in ahead of Malathot. So there's got to be another horse I'm missing here.
So my top 4 in this race, and I'll talk about it in my video preview I'll do tomorrow as well, would be Travel Column over search results Clairiere, who was finishing behind Travel Column in those fairgrounds races, and then Malathot. Just from a value standpoint, I'd rather go to those other horses over the Pletcher-trained filly. But I do think that those 4 single-digit horses on the morning line, for me, they're the 4 right horses.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see the betting in here. Clairiere may very well be the forgotten horse, and, it just kind of depends on the pace. I'm with you on paper. Maybe it doesn't look like a ton of speed, but that 14 horses does often do some crazy things out there. So it will be interesting to see how it shakes out, and pretty fascinating race, I think, and looking forward to it on, I think it's Friday evening. So it may, I guess it won't be dark, but it'll be toward the end of the day.
Yes, I believe post time for the Oaks is 5:51 p.m. on Friday Eastern time, so looking forward to that. Now, though, let's transition to Saturday's races at Churchill Downs and discuss the Kentucky Derby, which was just drawn at 11 a.m. this morning. And obviously, 20 horses entered for this race. Craig, I think you agree with me that post positions generally don't matter that much in these 1.25 mile races with a long straightaway and that run to the first turn. I guess the narrative is that the one horse that was negatively affected by the post position draw is Known Agenda, who drew the rail. That's historically been considered an undesirable post position, maybe a little bit less so now that they've got the new starting gate. But I'm not going to let the post position draw change too much, or the opinions that I had coming into this race.
No, I'm the same way. I've long past the time where I'm going to watch post position draws. I just wait till it comes out and see it. And my first thought when I glanced through it was, it looks fine. I didn't see a single horse that stood out and I was like, that's going to hurt or that's going to help. I just thought it was fine. I don't see anybody getting a particularly bad trip or good trip just based on post position. I don't even worry about the rail personally, especially with the new gate. I've seen the video of the old gate where you kind of broke out and you almost had to come over. So you were in the gap a little bit. So you didn't run into the rail, but that seems to have gone away. So for a horse like Known Agenda, who's kind of a stalker, kind of gets a few lengths off of it, I don't think it's going to be any problem and could very well turn out to be an advantage.
And if there's one rider who can get himself off the rail, it's Irad Ortiz. Whatever he has to do it, he'll get it done. So I wouldn't worry too much about Known Agenda drawing the rail in this race. All right, let's get into the major contenders. And I think we've got to start the conversation with the 2-1 morning line favorite Essential Quality. We've talked about these prep races all spring long, and we haven't had too many breakout speed figures, horses that are running numbers of 120 plus on the TimeformUS scale. So typically you'd come into this race saying that Essential Quality is a little bit slow, but in the context of this field, I mean, he makes a lot of sense, and he's got the versatility that you can't really throw him out, even if you don't think he's going to offer value as the 2-1 favorite.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think he's going to run well. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't, but I mean, I'm not betting a 2-1 shot in the Kentucky Derby, and this is a case where I don't really have a problem with the morning line. It's not often that we get a horse this low in the Derby, but I'm sure you've seen the reports like I have that Mattress Mac has some promotion going on where if you buy a $3,000 mattress, it's free if the favorite wins. So he's kind of hedging his bets and saying he's going to bet $2 million on them. So it almost seems like it's assured he's going to be an underlay. So while he's a horse I'll use, he's not one I would have loved anyway, even before that news came out, which is only a small thing, really. I mean, it may make a horse who was going to be 5-2, 2-1, or maybe 9-5 with pools this big, but it's still enough to matter. And I don't know. He's just not a horse. He's done nothing wrong, but when I watch his races, I'm not blown away. The speed figures, I'm not blown away. So I'm going to take a shot against him. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, I'm not going to be shocked when he does well in this race. I'm not going to be shocked when he wins the race, and he's suddenly a Triple Crown threat. But I like you, I've not been overly impressed by Essential Quality. I'm also not totally convinced that this is a true mile and a quarter horse. I've said this before on this show that, I mean, he's got a real sprint pedigree on the dam side. I know he's by Tappet, but I didn't love the way he was finishing off the bluegrass. It's not like he was running through the wire with vigor. He was, to my eye, he was hanging a little bit. I didn't think that Highly Motivated was coming back at him. I just thought that Essential Quality wasn't really putting that horse away. So now he's got to get the mile and a quarter, and he's going to have to do it with a much more taxing pace scenario than he faced in the bluegrass, where, contrary to what some people have tried to argue, he got a perfect trip in that bluegrass. And I think the number that we saw from him that day is the best that he can do right now. And maybe that's going to be good enough to win the Kentucky Derby. I just have my doubts, and I wouldn't want to bet on that at the likely short odds of 2-1 or 5-2. So I'm kind of on the exact same page as you, Craig. I think he can win this race, but I want some better value.
Yeah, for sure. And that said, I guess I'll jump right in. The horse that I really like the most in here is one who showed high speed last time, his first time on dirt. He actually did run that speed figure that is often required to win a race like the Kentucky Derby, and that's Rock Your World. I've just been of the mind that the best horses we've seen all year have been out west. That included Medina Spirit, Life is Good, but obviously, Life is Good was injured and taken off the trail, but Medina Spirit was no weak sister. I mean, he had run some big races, not in Life is Good's quality, but certainly grade 1 performance for early season 3-year-olds. And Rock Your World just blew him away. He looked like a horse who was kind of the like John Sadler had a trick up his sleeve that he knew about and nobody else did, because this horse looked like the real deal to me. He's shown on the turf he doesn't have to be on the lead. He should be able to get good tactical position, and I just loved everything I saw. I loved how he's been working out, so I can say right from the jump, barring anything crazy happening between now and Saturday, he's going to be the horse that keys my tickets.
Yeah, I think there's no question that Rock Your World possesses the talent to win the Kentucky Derby. It's just, I think the big question that people might have is, historically, horses with just 3 starts under their belt that have made all 3 starts as a 3-year-old. I mean, the saying goes, it hadn't been since Apollo that a horse had won without racing as a 2-year-old since, who was it, Justify that broke that, and Justify also had just 3 starts coming into the Kentucky Derby. But, I mean, he was the exception to the rule, and generally you want horses with a bit more experience. Do you worry about that at all, especially since in his only dirt start to date, he didn't have to take any kickback on the front end. He just got to the lead, and Medina Spirit, for whatever reason, they decided to rate him that day. They didn't want to challenge that horse on the lead. And not that he was going slow up front, because the pace of the Santa Anita Derby was legitimate, and he kept going. But I do have some questions about Rock Your World not having the seasoning to win the Derby. I do think that matters.
You know, I wonder about these rules. I've been around a long time, and I can remember a lot of rules that have come and gone by the wayside. I can remember the dosage rules. I can remember you had to have 3 starts. I can remember you had to have raced at 2. And they all just seem to be falling by the wayside because the game is changing. So, I mean, heck, there's 3 or 4 horses in this race that have only run 1 time all year. Not saying that I like them, but it just kind of shows we would have never seen a horse like that even 10 years ago, and now we have 3 or 4 of them. So I'm not going to worry about those things. Rules are made to be broken, and they're only rules until they aren't, because as we've seen with Justify, and I can't even remember who the 2 prep horse was that first broke that rule, and the dosage horses, and I'm sure there's been a couple others that I've forgotten. We had the outside post things that you couldn't win from out there. They've all kind of fallen by the wayside, so I'm not going to let it affect me here. If it burns me, maybe I'll revisit it. But yeah, I'm not too worried about it. And as far as the pace, he didn't take any kickback that day. But given his tactical speed, I'm not sure he would have to here. He's drawn outside. There's nothing that says he can't rate second or third, kind of like a trip American Pharaoh had, where he just sat outside the other speed horses and ran by him in the stretch. So in this case, I think he's going to be a good 5 or 6 to 1. I'm hoping maybe he'll be the wise guy horse and not be, but anytime I get that on the horse that I think's fastest coming in, I'm going to take it.
No argument with that. Let's just go on now and go back and forth talking about a few different contenders that I think deserve a lot of attention in this race. And we'll just go by some of the favorites on the morning line. Known Agenda, the winner of the Florida Derby. He's a horse that was visually impressive last time, but I think he's one that really does have to get faster, and I wonder if he's going to be able to do it, not just because he drew the rail in this race, but also because he's trained by Todd Pletcher, and Todd Pletcher is a guy that typically has his horses cranked to run their peak races and the preps, and I wonder if a Pletcher trainee is going to suddenly step up and run a much faster race in the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, I don't like him. We talked about it many times on both the Pacecast and Forecast. The crop at Gulfstream this year wasn't up to the levels we've seen in the past. And I think he took advantage of that. I don't think there's anything phony about the speed figure he ran last time, which is decidedly slower than some others in here. I do think he'll work out a good trip, and it wouldn't surprise me if he hits the board with Irad Ortiz, because he is the master at rating horses. The pace will probably be quick. We got 20 horses, and he's the guy I would pick if I had a jockey in this race, because I think he'll be able to work out a nice trip. But I just don't think the horse is good enough.
Another horse that's single digits on the morning line is Hot Rod Charlie, and I've got to say, I haven't quite made my top 4 picks for this race yet. I'm going to do it after we record this show and kind of, really focus on it. But Hot Rod Charlie, for me, definitely has to be in the conversation because he just makes so much sense. He's run speed figures that are almost as fast as the favorite Essential Quality. He was obviously right with Essential Quality in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year, and I thought he ran pretty well in both of his races as a 3-year-old, particularly last time out in the Louisiana Derby when he showed improved tactical speed, actually going to the front end early in the race. And it seems like based on that race, he's going to get the distance. I mean, the Louisiana Derby was 1 mile and 3/16 this year. I guess he's got to deal with that 6-week layoff, but like you were saying with some of those rules, I don't think it matters so much anymore. And he just seems like a perfectly logical contender.
Yeah, that was the other rule I thought of. You couldn't be 5 weeks, and that went away. But yeah, I have no knocks on Hot Rod Charlie. He's run the same or better speed figure every single time out. He either stays the same or improves it. I liked it. He showed better tactical speed last time, but I don't think he's going to run that way on Saturday. I imagine he'll be a little bit further off the pace, but he's trained by a guy who's won a couple to Kentucky Derbies already. So no knocks on him at all. I do think he's a contender. I'll use him in my vertical tickets and wonder, just see how he does. The one reservation I have is that he is coming out of Louisiana. It hasn't exactly been a hotbed as far as the Kentucky Derby goes. They've been running at that new distance, 1 mile and 3/16. So I'm a little bit leery of the figures, especially that they changed it again this year with a different run up. But regardless, I mean, if it was a couple points slower, a couple points faster, it would make a difference. So yeah, I consider him a contender.
Yeah, we've got a couple other horses coming out of those fairgrounds races like Midnight Bourbon, who I think as a long shot in this race makes some sense. He's one of those horses that you probably like as a speed figure maker because he seems to run the same kind of number every time. He doesn't always win, but he's right there at the end of those races, and seems like he could also get 1.25 miles on his best day. And I don't know if I really view him as a win candidate, but I think he's one that could be right there. And you also have Obesos, who was right behind him in the Louisiana Derby last time. He's obviously a horse that's going to need some pace to close into, but I wonder if those horses can turn the tables on Hot Rod Charlie, who just seemed like he was better than them in that prep race.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Midnight Bourbon. I mean, I am for the reasons you said. As a speed figure guy, he's made it pretty easy rating these races as he seems to run the same race every time. But of the two you mentioned, I actually prefer Obesos. He's kind of been improving every time. He looked like he didn't really know what he was doing a few times out there. And even last time out until he finally kind of put it together in the stretch. And he was the one horse that was really making up some ground late and was eye-catching. And somebody had a poll out on Twitter, asked the question, who's the one horse who you don't think is going to win, but you're going to be forced to put a bet on, or that you will put a bet on? And he was the one for me, just because I thought he ran better than looked. I didn't think he had put everything together and is moving in the right direction. So I like Obesos more than Midnight Bourbon out of those that you mentioned. I will bring up Mandaloon, who comes out of those. I've seen a lot of people like him. I think Marcus Hirsch, our colleague at DRF, liked him, but he's a horse I just can't get behind. I can't find any reason for that bad performance last time. And If you bet him, great. People out there like him. I can't blame you for having blind faith in Brad Cox, given his record the last couple years. But to me, that's exactly what you're doing. You're putting faith in the trainer. He hasn't come out with any reason, has said he couldn't figure out what happened that day. So out of that race, he's the one that I really want no parts of.
Yeah, I kind of have similar feelings to that. I know that certain horses every year leading up to the Kentucky Derby generate a lot of buzz based on the way that they're working out in the morning, and Mandaloun appears to be one of those horses this year. You can just see it by looking at the work tab. He's registered some impressive times in the morning, and I know he's generated buzz based on just the visual impression that he's created in those workouts. But still, I put the priority on the form coming into the race, and while I do think workouts are important, Mandaloun is a horse that's always worked well throughout his career, so I respect the eye of somebody who's been watching him at the fairgrounds and at Churchill Downs if they think he's gotten better in his workouts leading up to this race. But he's a horse that is going to have to do better than his last race because he just was not competitive in the Louisiana Derby last time, and it seemed like the connections had no excuse for that race. So I wonder if he can turn it around, and even if he gets back to his Risen Star, I'm not sure that he's quite good enough to beat this field. So he was not quite for me in this race. And I wonder if he's going to take a little more money than that 15-1 to morning line, just based on the buzz of those workouts. And we've got a couple other horses in this race that I know have been working well that could also take some money. One of those is Highly Motivated, who is 10-1 on the morning line. Seems like he's kind of gotten dragged into the conversation a little bit by Essential Quality, because it stands to reason that if you think Essential Quality is way the horse to beat in this race, then I think Highly Motivated has to be a horse you consider as well, because he finished just a neck back of him last time in the Bluegrass. I still have some concerns about Highly Motivated being a 1.25 mile horse. I'm a fan of this horse. I think he's talented. I just don't know if he really fits the profile of a Derby winner for me.
Yeah, and it's hard for me. As much as I said I was going to go against Essential Quality, it would be really hard to turn around and say that I love Highly Motivated, because while I wasn't all that impressed by Essential Quality, he did beat him fair and square. I mean, they both had perfectly fine trips. He set the pace. It wasn't particularly taxing. It was just kind of moderate that day. So I'm with you. I don't particularly see 1.25 miles in his pedigree, so I'm not expecting any real improvement here. So he's not for me.
I do want to talk about Medina Spirit, who you know that I've been high on going all the way back to February when he won that Robert B. Lewis, or I should say the end of January when he won that Robert B. Lewis. As much the best horse, despite only winning by a neck. He set a really taxing pace that day and was so game to battle back on the inside and get the victory over Hot Rod Charlie and Roman Centurion, two horses that had much better pace setups than he did in that race. Now, obviously, Medina Spirit's been a little bit of a disappointment since then. I mean, you can forgive him for being no match for Life is Good 2 back. Obviously, Life is Good would have been a big favorite in this Kentucky Derby if he had continued progressing the way that it looked like he would this spring, but he's off the trail and he's not in this race clearly. But the bigger disappointment was last time out in the Santa Anita Derby, where Medina Spirit was beaten pretty soundly by Rock Your World, who I know you like in this race, Craig. I didn't see a big excuse for Medina Spirit that day. Maybe he's a horse that does his best running on the lead, and rating him the last couple times has taken away that competitive fire, but that's really all that I can point to. Still, though, I'm not going to give up on him if he's a big price in this race.
No, I think he might slip through the cracks, and let's not kid ourselves. It's Bob Baffert, and he's won races like this at a price before, and if there was one horse in the field you could point to that in his last race, he didn't need points. Maybe he wasn't fully cranked. Maybe they were trying something different, seeing if he could rate a little bit, and it didn't work out. But I thought he ran just fine. He ran basically the same speed figure in the Derby as he had been run in the Santa Anita Derby as he had run the last couple times out. And he did it with a tougher trip. I mean, it was a pretty quick pace, as you had noted when I was talking about Rock Your World. We have the 1/2 mile in red. And Medina Spirit was 3 wide around that turn, which is just that by itself makes it a pretty tough trip. So I'm not writing off Medina Spirit. I will definitely be keeping a close eye on the odds. As I said, I preferred the Southern California horses most of the year, and he was certainly one of them. And I'm not going to give up on him yet. And if he slips through the cracks, which I think he very well may, he could easily wind up being 8, 10, 12-1 in here. He's one I would have some dollars on for sure.
Yeah, if he's like 12-1 in this race, I feel like I just can't resist picking him because, I mean, Bob Baffert at that kind of price in the Kentucky Derby, it just seems too good to be true. I wonder if he'll get bet down a little bit because he is Baffert's only runner in this race, and Baffert is such a presence in the Kentucky Derby, so people expect him to have a positive result. The other thing that I wonder about Medina Spirit is, do you think they're going to send him to the front? I feel like, given that he's drawn inside of all the other speed horses and the way that Bob Baffert usually thinks about these races, he's not a trainer who's afraid to be aggressive. And this is a horse who routinely breaks very alertly in his races. I bet they're going to send this horse to the lead. I personally think that would give him his best chance.
Yeah, he's shown pretty far back on the pace projector, but I think that's kind of silly. I don't... wait, I might have been looking at the wrong horse. I think he's actually second. Yeah, he is second. Yeah, I agree with you. I think he's going to be sent here because, as you said, he's inside, and that's Bob Baffert's MO. If he doesn't send, he's going to wind up in like 12th, and I don't think that's something that you want to do. And that's something a lot of these riders, I'm sure they'll be keeping in mind, is if you don't go from the inside, you are going to get shuffled back because there are going to be people who go that break well, or those that have just decided they want to see their number up on the board early in the race, maybe some hopeless long shot. But people are going to go. So I would expect Medina Spirit, who you said he always breaks well, he is going to go for sure. Maybe Rock Your World will sit off of him, but I think those two are going to be 1-2 up on the front, just like the pace projector says. Just maybe not in the order that we show it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think the pace projector is pretty close to accurate in this spot, but I would switch those two as you indicate. We've talked about most of the contenders. I think the two prep races that we haven't really touched upon are the Arkansas Derby and the Wood Memorial. I don't have a whole lot of positive comments to make about those races. I don't know if you saw anything in those races that would make you want to bet any of those horses back, but I thought they were kind of in a tough spot here.
Yeah, for me, I mean, the Wood Memorial was just so slow. I know it's a crazy track, but the horse that won was crazy odds, as was the runner-up, and I just think it was more the race flow and a goofy track. I don't really see much either one of those two having much chance in here. And I could actually say the same for the Arkansas Derby. I mean, Super Stock ran fine, but he took advantage of just a crazy speed duel between Caddo River and Concert Tour, neither of whom's connections thought enough to even send him here to the Derby, where they easily could have gotten in. And I just thought he got a dream trip. He's still a bit slower than the others, so those races just aren't for me. The one horse I did want to ask you a little bit about, the Lexington, since King Fury got in as well. He is by Curlin at least, so maybe the 1.25 miles is okay. But any thoughts on either of those races you asked me about or the Lexington?
No, I mean, Bourbonic winning the Wood Memorial, it was a really exciting race to watch. It's a replay that I like to go back and watch because it's just a fun race to watch unfolding, but I don't really think he's a contender in the Kentucky Derby. Dynamic won, he was second. He probably ran the best race that day, but like you said, it was such a slow race, they're going to have to get so much better to even hit the superfecta here, so I have trouble making a case for either one of them. The Super Stock, I have similar feelings. I guess the Arkansas Derby was a stronger race than the Wood, but it felt like the winner just fell into the perfect trip and the top two didn't go on in there. So I wasn't that high on him either. And as for King Fury, the Lexington winner, I know that he got a respectable speed figure in that race, but just felt like a perfect storm of events that created that. I mean, obviously there was a storm because there was a sloppy track that day, but also the pace was just so incredibly fast and it totally fell apart. He was second to last early. The runner-up was last early. They looped the entire field and won. Just feels like maybe not a true result. So I wanted to go in a different direction.
Yep, that's about it. I can't think of any of the other horses. I mean, Helium's in here. We haven't seen him since Tampa. I'm not interested in him at all. I've seen some people talk about Soup and Sandwich, but I've already said I don't like the Gulfstream horses, so he's not one I'm going to like. Maybe he'll be a pace presence for a little bit, but I think we pretty much covered the horses I'm interested in. Anybody else we're leaving out?
No, I think we've basically covered the major contenders and certainly all the horses that I think have a chance to be successful in this race. So just one that I'm really looking forward to. I mean, I love what the Kentucky Derby is, a competitive race. I mean, there have been some years in the recent past where it feels like the winner has already been crowned before they won the race. And this year, I'm not sure that I would put Essential Quality in that category. I think everybody has something to prove in this race, and I'm looking forward to see how they all sort themselves out.
Yeah, it should be a fun one, and I haven't had a chance to dive into the cards yet, but it looks like it's totally loaded. A lot of stars on the card, so it's not just the Derby itself. I know where I'm going to be. I'll be glued to the television and to my ADW on Friday and Saturday. So this is why we love the sport, and looking forward to this weekend. Nothing better for me other than maybe Breeders' Cup weekend.
Well, speaking of that entire Churchill Downs Saturday card, I'll do some plugs at the end of this podcast. I know there's that TimeformUS Kentucky Derby package that you can purchase on DRF.com. I think, Greg, you're doing something for that. I'm also handicapping the entire card with Marcus Hirsch, doing betting strategies for the entire day. So we'll be giving out top picks for all of the races at Churchill Downs and writing about most of them, especially all of those stakes races, crafting multi-race sequences for those. So you can check out that and get more information about it on DRF.com. So a lot going on this week, and also I'll be doing those 2 video previews of the Oaks and the Derby, which you can check out on DRF's YouTube channel tomorrow. So just a lot to look forward to for the rest of this Kentucky Derby week. As always, everybody, thanks for listening to this TimeformUS Pacecast. Again, just the one podcast this week, as we're already looking ahead to next weekend. There's not going to be a forecast this week. Craig and I have busy weeks coming up, so we'll get back to you next Tuesday when we do the Pacecast again to recap all of these races. Remember that you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to that daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS Pacecast a week from today, next Tuesday.